Okay, welcome back. Let's talk about some more science fiction. This week we're going to be exploring two different elements of science fiction. We're going to read a story by probably one of the most, if not the most important living science fiction writer, Ursula Le Guin. And we are also going to talk about what it takes to write science fiction professionally and see sort of both ends of the career spectrum. With Ursula Le Guin, we see someone who has had a long and successful career. And on the other end of the spectrum are new writers who are trying to get their writing noticed, who are trying to show that they have something to say and to share their ideas. So for our first assignment this week, I have us looking at publishing science fiction in terms of looking at the small press journals, magazines, literary magazines, and also looking at maybe some publishers, different companies that publish science fiction. So to that end, if you go on D2L and poke around a little bit, you'll see that I have lots of links to different journals. I think I have Clark's World, Asimov's, Fantasy and Science Fiction. I have Analog Science Fiction. In fact, I think I have Orson Scott Card's Intergalactic Medicine Show. And that's just a few of the magazines that publish science fiction. Those magazines, particularly Clark's World, Asimov's, Analog, they are some of the most well-known and established magazines in the genre. Some of them have histories that go back to the early half of the 20th century. People like Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke, Robert Heinlein, these people got their starts in magazines like Fantasy and Science Fiction or Analog. There was another one called Amazing Science Fiction. And so over the years, people start in the magazines and they generally tend to get noticed. The way it works is you publish a few stories, you sell a few stories, and then you get an agent, someone who advocates for your writing, and ultimately you'll end up with a contract with a publisher, a big publisher, maybe to write novels or something like that. A bigger publisher, I should say, because there's lots of small publishers out there, and they publish really great stuff. Interestingly, this summer I finished reading John Scalzi's Old Man's War. This is Scalzi's best-known work and the first in a series of books that he wrote. John Scalzi is an interesting character because, A, he is controversial within the science fiction world because he always has a lot to say. But also, Scalzi just signed a $3.4 million deal with Tor Publishing. Or I think he has to publish 15 books over 10 years. They give him an advance, and $3.4 million is the total that they'll pay him, not including his books being translated into other languages, his ability to sell film or television rights, and his ability to sell the audiobook rights. So Scalzi is today probably the best paid science fiction writer as of last month. And so he, like Ursula Le Guin, is on the far end of the spectrum. Writing is hard work. You have the idea sometimes that science fiction writing or any type of writing involves some talented artist going and sitting themselves down and pouring out the ideas, the creative ideas that they have in their head. Probably more time is spent choosing the right words, editing out errors, making sure that all your paragraphs make sense and do what they're supposed to do. Science fiction writing and all fiction writing is a arduous and long process. It's not easy. You don't just punch out your story and send it to a journal and have someone say, "This is brilliant, you're the next big science fiction writer." It's like training for a marathon. You start small and then you work your way up to be able to successfully complete and write a whole story. And then sell that story. And the competition is fierce. These magazines get thousands of submissions monthly. The chances of your story standing out in that onslaught of submissions is questionable. So I thought it would be helpful because I often have students who are interested in the writing end of sci-fi, and they share their stories with me. We have an assignment in the class that asks you to write and share a story. And I thought it would be good to have a realistic idea of what it actually takes to be a science fiction writer And so focusing on small journals, magazines, the entry level sort of publishing that science fiction writers do, I thought would be both revealing, fascinating, and maybe helpful to some people who have an interest in doing their own writing. So for this week, choose a journal, do a little bit of research on a magazine, one of the ones I have posted, or a publisher, one of the ones I have posted on the D2L shell, or a different one. Research that publisher, research that magazine. How long have they been around? Who's the editor? What kind of stuff do they publish? And then read a story. It can be any story. They have some free available online, or maybe you could buy one. It's up to you. Read a story from one of those magazines, or from one of the publishers that I have listed, and I'll be interested to hear your impression of that story. So that's the first thing we're going to do this week. The second assignment is you are going to read a story by Ursula Le Guin, like I said, called Vaster Than Empires and More Slow. This is an early short story by Le Guin. If you like this story, I very much enjoy this story. If you like this story, you may consider reading her two great works, which are The Left Hand of Darkness and The Dispossessed. Just like Vaster Than Empires, Left Hand of Darkness and Dispossessed are part of what we call the Hainish Cycle, what Ursula Le Guin calls the Hainish Cycle. And seeing as we're talking about writing and publishing and thinking about science fiction this week, I thought I would talk for a few minutes about world building, and this would be our way into discussing Vaster Than Empires. So one thing that science fiction writers have to do is something called world building, where you have ideas for your fantastic world, the planets that you've encountered, or the galaxy that's populated by different races. And you have to come up with all the different elements to make this world believable. The setting, the scenario you're presenting to your reader has to be believable, and that's not easy. So the way Ursula Le Guin has solved this problem is she has set up a world, a network, a background for many of her stories. And here's how it works. The original human population in the universe, in the galaxy, was developed or evolved on a planet called Hain, H-A-I-N. Hain is an ancient world, an ancient civilization, much older than Earth. The planet Hain had gone around and did something called seeding. They seeded other planets throughout the galaxy, throughout the universe. And seeding means that you plant life there, that the planet was previously devoid of life or only had primitive life, and the civilization from Hain introduced life to that planet. In Ursula Le Guin's novels and short stories, this premise holds up for all the short stories, whether it's the ice planet that the main character visits in Left Hand of Darkness, whether it's the two binary planets circling one another, one capitalist and one anarchist, that are in conflict in The Dispossessed, or in Vaster Than Empires, a dissatisfied race of Earth people are bummed out to find that they are not an original species, that we didn't evolve here, and that we're not special. Not only are we not special, we are a creation of another civilization, the Hainish civilization. So we feel a little less important about this. And so in Vaster Than Empires, Hain kindly helps us put together a crew, and a crew from some other planets as well. And this crew goes out to discover a planet that contains life that was not originally seeded by Hain. The crew that they send is very dysfunctional because of the way that time slip works when you travel. The further you travel from your home planet, and the further out you go into the galaxy, the further you go back in time. So the characters in this story are leaving on a trip that'll take them several months, a few weeks, but when they return to Earth, 200 years will have passed. So all the characters are sort of mentally unwell because they're willing to make this choice to go through this time slip. The other thing that's sort of interesting is that even though she has this world-building idea, the grand scheme of Hain, seeding Earth, seeding other planets, building a multi-planet civilization across the galaxy, the planet that she comes up with for the characters to visit in this story only hosts plant life. There's no animal life on this planet, and so the human beings from Hain and Earth and the other planet, I think, is Setia 1 or something like that. They are the first animals to land on this planet, and the only one who has a chance to perhaps interact or recognize life other than Hainish life, other than biological life, Earth life, is this very dysfunctional character named Ogden, who he uses, he's sensitive to emotions, he's sensitive to feelings. And so the feelings of the other people on the ship are constantly tormenting them because he always knows how they feel towards him. But this special ability, this empathy he has, is the one chance they have of maybe finding life on this planet. And in the story, Ursula Le Guin does a wonderful job building the world of the planet, but she also does a wonderful job building the relationships. Very complex, very unusual, very idiosyncratic relationships between the crew of this spaceship. So when you're reading this story, I would like you to pay attention to a few things. How does she do world building? How does she create the background? How does she do this in the short space of a relatively short story? And also, what does life mean? What does it mean to have intelligent life? What does it mean for us to encounter life? Because we define life based on Earth life. We define life based on ourselves and the things that we've encountered, carbon, oxygen-based, sort of nitrogen-based life. But what would it mean when we have the ability to spread out through the rest of the galaxy, throughout the universe? And will we even recognize other intelligent life when we meet it? That's one of the questions that SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and others are always asking, will we recognize life when we find it? And Ursula Le Guin plays with that question in this story too. I hope you enjoy the stories. I hope you enjoy studying what it takes to be a science fiction writer, and I very much look forward to reading what you say on both topics this week.